Good evening. In the early 1930s, a gentleman by the name of Herbert J. Taylor set out to save a business and industry within the aluminum industry called Club Aluminum Products. And it was a distribution company that had found itself, as so many other businesses did in the 1930s, as you can imagine, in this country, across the world, but facing bankruptcy because of the Great Depression. Mr. Taylor believed himself to be the only one in this particular company that employed some 250 employees, but he was the only one who believed that there was hope for the company if the individuals of that company would manifest the right spirit, take on a proper work ethic, make some sacrifices as individuals within the company, and then just plain roll up your sleeves and get to work. And as facing many businesses and companies of that era, that was going to be an ominous challenge. His recovery plan started with the changing of the ethical climate of the company. He had found out that all too often in this company and many other types of businesses as such, is that there was greed, avarice, people that were not being honest. And he explained, as I quote, the first job was to set policies for the companies that would reflect the high ethics and morals God would want in any business. If the people who worked for Club Aluminum were to think right, I knew they would do right. What we needed was a simple, easily remembered guide to right conduct, a sort of ethical yardstick, which all of us in the company could memorize and apply to what we thought, said, and did. He continued in this interview many years later, I searched through many books for the answer to our need, but the right phrases eluded me. So I did what I often do when I have a problem that I can't answer myself. I turned to the one who has all the answers. And I leaned over my desk, rested my hands, and prayed. After a few moments, I looked up and reached for a white paper card. Then I wrote down the 24 words that have come to me. Number 1, is it the truth? Number 2, is it fair to all concerned? Number 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And number 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned? The very first time that I read those 4 rules, if you will, what was called the FourWay Test, was many, many years ago when I walked into the office of the cabinet shop at my father-in-law, because that is the FourWay Test of Rotarians. And as I was reading that, I saw my father-in-law, Paul Fields, smile. Herbert J. Taylor was a director of Rotary International. And it was he that created what had become known as the FourWay Test, used as a moral and ethical code for personal and business relationships. And the fact of the matter is, within the interview, and what we know now, that he was very much guided and directed by words and by principles, I should say, that came from God and from God's Word. And I wish that everybody would understand the great wisdom there is, that when we are faced with issues in life, with circumstances, when we see that there is a need for something that needs or should be improved, what wisdom will we turn to? Will we turn to the world wisdom, the wisdom that is all about us, the wisdom that is defined by James in James chapter 3 as being earthly and sensual and demonic, the wisdom that is self-centered? Or will we turn to a wisdom that emanates from heaven itself because it is a wisdom of God, That which has a higher standard, a higher moral, ethical, and spiritual standard. I do not know really all of the religious background of Mr. Taylor, but this much I know, that he recognized that there was but one source to which we must turn if we're going to make our lives successful as God views success, and that is within God's Word. What I find very fascinating about this study in the book of James, and we were in James chapter 2 this morning talking about questions about faith and works. There's 5 chapters in the book of James. And we dealt with those first 2 chapters that we are to be doers of the word and not hearers only. That we have the responsibility in the first part of chapter 2 to fulfill the royal law, to love our neighbor as ourselves. And it's royal because Jesus articulated that, and he is our king. And that is our duty to follow after the laws and the commandments that have been set forth, down forth by Christ himself. And then James poses those questions that we addressed this morning. They're rhetorical questions, but they all indicated one thing and one resounding conclusion, that faith without works is dead. In chapters 4 and 5, James will then find himself asking further questions and making observations about the world and about its selfishness and why there can be wars and fightings even amongst brethren. And I tell you, it's no coincidence that the beginning of chapter 4 and addressing that falls right on the heels of this section in chapter 3 that he spoke about wisdom. This contrast. The beginning of chapter 3 is about what? Let there not be many teachers among you, knowing that you shall incur a stricter judgment. And he speaks about the power, the influence of the tongue, of verbal communication. And then once he's addressed that of how powerful our communication can be and how we can sway people and persuade people, convince people, he knew this, that the majority of the world has become enamored with human wisdom. And there are plenty of people, plenty of folks today, businesses that are prospering, that are doing well, and they may be great companies in the stock market. They may be Fortune 500 companies. But I'll tell you what, that you look at the moral, the ethics of so many of these people, and you know what it is? It's getting ahead, and if it means stabbing somebody in the back, so be it. But there's a higher standard to which we must answer. And so here it is, that James, in James chapter 3, and verses 13 through 18, basically he is pleading to these brethren, he is challenging his brethren to check your wisdom. What is the source of your wisdom? That we have a responsibility to analyze the wisdom that we are employing. Because when all is said and done, the wisdom that we employ, if it's in our marriage, if it's raising our children, if it's dealing with our work, our school, in our neighborhood and community, no matter what it is in this life and in this world, the wisdom that we are employing is going to come from one of 2 sources. The wisdom from above, emanating from God, or a wisdom that the vast majority of people are following, the wisdom of this world. And while it may get you ahead in this world, you would lose your soul for eternity. That's the message of James in all of its practicality. James analyzes these 2 contrasting wisdoms. And it does require of us an honest examination on our part. And it is prompted by this question, if you'll look right there at the text of James chapter 3 and verse 13. Here's the question that prompts it all. Who is wise and understanding among you? Do you suppose that Steve Jobs was wise and understanding in the ways of the world? He was. Do you suppose today that Warren Buffett is wise and understanding when it comes to business and finance and investments? Do you suppose, again, these financial gurus and leaders that are in the world, along with the political leaders across the world, that they have learned how to employ a type of wisdom that will keep them ahead? Don't ever think for a moment that this world wisdom does not have success. It does have success. It's just the wrong kind. And Satan wants us to buy in. And many people are. And their lives have become enamored about things, about success by virtue of monetary value, materialism, and the things that we can experience in this world. But all the while, forgetting about spiritual responsibility and duty towards God. So I looked at this text, and I think that we're going to see in this brief perusal of it of 4 examinations. And as we consider what I'm referring to, analyzing our source of wisdom, that is the 4-way test, and Rotary had its 4-way test, and I think in some respects there's a 4-way test going on here in the text of James 3. And the very first examination, because when you look at verse 13, when he asks, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by his good life his works in meekness and wisdom." Examination number 1, brethren, every one of us, you know what we need to do? We need to evaluate our life. Look at your life. Think about your life. Think about the relationships in your life, your profession, your vocation, your interest. Think about what you view as your needs. Think about every aspect of what your life is. Examine your life. Evaluate your life. And what he says again is when he asks who is wise and understanding among you, he says, let him show by his good life his works in meekness of wisdom. That's not what the world desires. Jesus said in Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before others that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. The Apostle Paul says in Philippians 2:15 that you may become blameless and harmless children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. Oh, they're wise by the world's standards, but among whom you shine, he says, as lights in the world. You know, there's a real interesting contrast when you look at life in these verses. In verse 16 of our text in James 3, and we'll not stray far from James 3 in our few observations this evening, but in verse 16 he says, for where jealousy and faction are, there is confusion in every vile deed. There is confusion. And I want to tell you right now, I want you to look at your life. Examine, evaluate your life. Is there confusion or is there peace? Verse 18. Those are contrasts in many respects. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace for them that make peace. I'm not going to share with you all the Greek words I have before me. I went ahead and I just did an analysis of all of the Greek words that are found in this text in reference to the 2 kinds of wisdom and what the contrast has been going on. But this confusion here, it is the concept. It means it's the idea of disorder. It's disorder. And there are people that live disorderly lives. Oh, they may be, again, successful lives, and they may be enjoying life to the fullest as the world looks at it. But I want to tell you what is disorderly. And they are not disposed to peace. And that's what the word peaceable really refers to. The way and the form that is used in verse 18, one who is disposed to peace. I want to ask you, do you show by your life that you have faith in God and that you have faith in His ways, in His will, and that no matter what may be going on in this world, evaluate your life. Is your life a true reflection of godliness, of righteousness? Or has it become a reflection somehow of what's going on in the world? Evaluate your life. And when you evaluate your life, you're going to find out if that life is a life that is following after the recipe of worldly wisdom, or if it's following after the design of the recipe of the wisdom that comes from above in heaven. Examination number 2. Evaluate your heart. Look in the first part of verse 14. Remember, the question that we have is, who is wise and understanding among you? This is what James is doing. He's going to give a contrast. But as he answers his own question, as I said this morning, there's a lot of rhetorical questions in James, but he's actually supplying deeper answers in this section. And to this question in verse 14 and verse 8, he says that when you look at this, but if you have bitter jealousy and faction in your heart, not only to examine our life and what is the direction of our life, what interests in our life, and all those things I posed a couple of moments ago. But now let's even look at it more closely. Let's put ourselves under the microscope a little bit more, and now let's talk about the heart. Because what do we mean by the heart? We mean the mind, the thinking process, the true attitude, the motives by which we do what we do. What's your heart directed by? What directs, guides, leads your heart? There are a lot of heart issues in dealing with people. Again, relationships with people and relationship with God. And what is leading or guiding your heart? What's in your heart? Remember what Jesus taught in Mark chapter 7? And there were those that were worried about, even as the scribes and the Pharisees from time to time, about what a person may take in, or maybe not washing their hands. And you know what? They did not understand. They just did not understand the true issue. And Jesus says to them in Mark 7:18, "Are you thus without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile the body? Cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods. And he said, what comes out of a man, that defiles a man. For from within, from out of the heart of a man, that defiles a man, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness." He would conclude by saying, all these evil things come from within and defile a man. What's in your heart? And I'll tell you, in those heart issues, I think there's another contrast that I find interesting, and that is the contrast of the jealousy that's exposed in verse 14 of our text of James 3. But if you have bitter jealousy as opposed to purity. And I'll tell you, when a person has a pure heart, they don't find themselves being jealous and envious about others. Jealousy is always an interesting word study in the Bible. In the New Testament Greek, and the word that we have there is zelos, and in zelos, and just, like zeal even, but it has to do with that which has become quite heated even. It's a lack of temperature control. And what you have, though, is that because the idea is jealousy is something that is bubbling up, it's burning up in one's heart towards another person. Are you jealous of any of your fellow workers, people at your work? Are you jealous of any neighbors? Are you jealous of any of your brethren? Are you jealous of any family members? Are you jealous? Does it create even some negative thoughts towards evil towards other people because of what they have achieved or accomplished, and maybe you feel that you're not there? What's in your heart? The purity that is spoken of in verse 17 is this wisdom that is from above is first pure, and then it is peaceable, but it's first pure. First, it's got to be pure first. If it's not pure first, then the other items might possibly be compromised. You've got to have purity of heart first. What's in your heart? James would say in the very next chapter, in James chapter 4 and verse 8, James 4:8, "Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded." One of the issues that James addresses is double-mindedness. He does in chapter 1, he does in chapter 3, he does in chapter 4. He's addressing double-mindedness, to be duplicitous, to not to have that single mind, to be focused. And that's what's going on. And that even Christians can find themselves in this tug of war. Do you ever find yourself in business or in the job or having that competitive spirit? And I'll tell you what it can do. It can create double-mindedness, and we lose the sight of the true, pure goal. Is your heart pure? Is it free from the defilements of the world? You have to work on that. And the wisdom that comes from above is first pure. And this is the effort that we've got to make. It has got to be a solid effort to keep our thoughts, our minds pure from the garbage, the defilement of this world. And is it a chore? Of course it is. I have no idea what commercials will be most glorified today with the Super Bowl. I have no idea of what it is that people will like the most out of that which Madison Avenue is producing. But if history teaches us anything, the more vain, the more vulgar, the more worldly, the more materialistic, the more sensual, the more it is of that, people are all over it. And didn't he just say that's what world wisdom is? And we look at it, and because it's clever, because it's cute, because it incites laughter. But what it does, because Satan knows what he's doing, it wells up within us the thoughts and the emotions that we have no business flirting with. What's in your heart? So when you stay in verse 14, and I think this can bring us to a third examination, and that is to evaluate your foundation or evaluate your source. And I like this expression in 14, at the second half of verse 14. We'll just read all of verse 14. But if you have bitter jealousy and faction in your heart, but watch this at the second part, what we'll call 14b. Glory not and lie not against what? The truth. You know, facts are facts. And if they're facts, they're true. But in any given situation, scenario, or subject, it is the accumulation of all the facts of everything that is true that will bring you to the truth of the matter. And when we talk about the truth, and as the Bible refers to the truth, as Jesus talked about the truth, and Jesus said in John 8:32, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And Jesus prayed to the Father in John 17:17, sanctify them in your truth. Your word is truth. We understand what the truth is, where the truth comes from, and how we are to line again our hearts to that. So in this examination, evaluate your source when you think about what you do and what makes you tick. What makes you want to do what you want to do and crave what you want to crave and go where you want to go, and what you're going to put in your life as a priority. I appreciate, Brother John, in the prayer tonight, the concept that you incorporated in there a few times of priority, because that's what this is about. What is your source? Evaluate your source. Is it the truth? And in this contrast of verse 15, when he's identifying what this wisdom, he says this wisdom that does not come down from above, but it is what? Earthly. And he goes on to say things like sensual and devilish. But it is earthly. It is worldly. As opposed to what? From a higher place. From above, verse 17. But the wisdom that is from above. And there is the clear delineation that is present there, that is seen. James is saying that we've got in this new mindset that when we're examining or evaluating our life and our heart, if we're going to evaluate and realize that my life needs to go in this direction of God and my heart needs to be in tune with God, then I've got to get back to the source. And the source better be the truth of God's Word. The seeds have within them, as James will use this example a lot in James. He's going to be talking about the seed and scattering seed, and he's going to use this agricultural analogy and illustration repeatedly throughout the book of James. And when he talks about seeds and planting seeds and the power of the seed has within it, or the seeds have within them, everything necessary for reproduction of fruit. It is a miracle when you think about it, as we kind of view what God can do, that you can take a seed and plant that seed and it germinates. After it just about dies, it begins to decay or decompose, and then it germinates and something comes forth. But what he's saying is that, listen, what is the source that you're using? There's a lot of different seeds that can be planted, and there's a lot of different fruit that'll come about, which is going to be our last point in just a second. The seeds have within them everything necessary for reproduction of fruit. But my question is this, my friends: what kind of fruit will it be? Look at the source. And as you go into your week this week, no matter who you're talking to, who you're dealing with, the way you react to people, the attitudes that you portray, the language that you use, the decisions that you make, the places that you go, you better evaluate the source. And if you find out that you're allowing your life and your heart to be controlled by a bad source, the fruit of your life is going to be bad. That's what James is warning about, and it takes us to our final point. And that takes us to fruit. The fourth examination is evaluate your fruit. Evaluate your fruit. In verse 18, he says, "And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace for them that make peace." Peace is a beautiful principle, a beautiful concept. Within the Beatitudes, Jesus said in Matthew 5:9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Are you a peacemaker? And I'll tell you, if you're a peacemaker, all you have to do is examine the fruit of your life. Think about those relationships again, of your marriage. Are you a peacemaker in your marriage? Examine the fruit of your marriage. Are you a peacemaker in the congregation? Examine your fruit in the congregation. Is the fruit that of peace, or is the fruit of that which is divisive, or again, envious and jealousy, and where even bad things are easily said about others? Examine your fruit. Does that take some honesty? The best example that we can probably think of, because most of us can connect to this so well, because while not everybody is, but many, many, many of us here are parents. Look at your fruit. Look at the fruit by virtue of your children. Do children turn out to be what they are just by accident and without any involvement by ourselves? We know better than that. Children, in so many respects, are what we make them as parents. And what I'm saying to you is that if we can understand that concept, and that's why we love them and we train them and we discipline them, and it is something that we look at as one of the most serious responsibilities that God gives us. What I'm saying is take those principles and now apply that into so many other areas in your life as well. What is the fruit of your life? What kind of worker are you at the job? Are you a worker in which other people notices, and they can, as they analyze your fruit, and they say, well, there's an individual that's lazy or looking for a way out, or is always watching the clock, who's just counting their time and more interested about retirement than they are about doing the best job that they can do? Look again at the fruit of your relationships with your neighbors or your friends. How do they really, truly view you? The fruit of righteousness is sown in peace for them that make peace. And the contrast that I think that is seen here is that when we evaluate the fruit of people that employ the wisdom of this world, verse 16 states it very, very correctly. For where jealousy and faction are, there is confusion, and every vile deed. Every bad, it's very negative, every vile deed versus what we see in verse 18, righteousness. Righteousness. The expression every vile deed literally means all and every evil practice there is. The lexicons are just all in agreement on that. But the idea, the concept of righteousness there, and we know right doing is determined by God, but one of the definitions or one of the words that comes out, a word that comes out over and over, many of the definitions of righteousness that I've seen in my research of this is the word that keeps popping up is integrity. Integrity. You know what? What's the fruit of your being a spouse, the fruit of your being a parent, the fruit of your being a worker, the fruit of your being a student, the fruit of you being a citizen? Is it integrity? And I close with this concerning this point. It is true that we reap what we sow. That's very true. In fact, I tell you, to me it's axiomatic. It's a given. It's true that we reap what we sow. But it is also true that we, listen to this, that we sow in the hearts of others what we reap because of our influence. We sow in the hearts of others what we reap because of our own influence. If your marriage is a good marriage, it's because you have acted in a very integrous way to make it so. If you've been the kind of parent that you should be, then there was integrity and righteousness that was employed. And of all of the other venues and areas and realms of living, but here it is absolutely imperative that we recognize that we must be honest with ourselves as we examine or evaluate our own fruit. Are there going to be some adjustments needed? That's going to be true with every one of us. Every one of us. I know that. I know that so very well. I think this is a four-way test. That when sometimes we look at this passage and we define, well, here's the wisdom of the world, and here's the wisdom that comes from God, and we look at those words and we define those, and that's all great. We do these word studies and we talk about it, but I tell you, I think what really comes out of this is I think that there's a four-way examination here that is not just good to do every now and again. It is something we probably need to do very regularly, perhaps even daily. Evaluate your life, evaluate your heart, evaluate your source, and evaluate the fruit that is the byproduct of your life. And I think if we will do that, I think it's going to help us improve our walk with God and with one another in all of these important human relationships. Analyze the source of your wisdom. Be honest about it. If we can help you this evening in analyzing your condition with God right now, go to the truth. Go to His Word. God's removed all the guesswork. We can go to the source, to His Word. We can help you to make that decision for Christ, to become a Christian tonight, or whatever you need to improve your relationship with God. Let us assist you in any way that we can, with open minds and open Bibles. Won't you come at this time as we stand and sing the song that has been selected?